All right, welcome back. It's been a hot minute since I've recorded an episode. However, coming in with something a little bit different today, I wanted to talk about something that comes up in a lot of relationships. It's about when our wounds from the past speak, when they navigate the whole relationship. So, triggers, defense patterns, and how we can move towards healing that within relationships. And what I wanted to do was break down some of the concepts to help people recognize when triggered reactions are driven by past wounds rather than by the present circumstances. I also want to provide some psychological and NLP based tools that will help regulate those emotions, communicate more consciously, and support healthier dynamics without excusing the harmful behavior. This is not about excusing behavior. It's about understanding what's going on and how to move forward in a healthy way. So the real problem, it isn't the argument that you're having. It's the wound that's festering underneath it. Because here's the thing, people rarely react to what was actually said, the words. How often have you heard, well, it's not what you said, it's the way you said it? People are reacting to what they heard through past conditioning. And what happens then is that the triggered brain moves from the prefrontal cortex, which is all about logic, and goes boom into the amygdala, which triggers a threat response. So defensive reactions are actually protective strategies. They're not who the person is. It's not their personality. It's their protective strategy. Again, this is not about making excuses. This is not an excuse. This is about understanding why. Why does that happen? Whether it's you, whether it's your partner, the more we know, the more we understand, the more we can take control. So what I meant by that in a nutshell, often you're not angry because your partner asked something or said something. You're angry because your nervous system translated it as a threat based on old data, old programming, old thoughts. So as I said, a person's behavior is not who they are. It's not their identity. People are not their behaviors. Behaviors are strategies. And those strategies are often outdated. They served a purpose once upon a time. However, we've not taught ourselves how to rewrite those strategies. So we keep using those old strategies, which were designed to protect our needs. So you can understand when people get defensive because what they believe in the moment, based on those outdated designs, what they believe is that a need or a value is being either denied or threatened or attacked. So they become defensive and away we go. Some examples of those protective behaviors. So the trigger might be feedback. The wound that trigger comes from is most likely to do with rejection. The behavior strategy on it is anger and shutting down. But the underlying need that's being threatened is belonging and acceptance. A trigger of questioning. I know a lot of people that can get triggered when they start getting questioned about things. So the wound origin of that is criticism. The behavior strategy that comes into play is defensiveness. And the underlying need that's been threatened is safety or respect. Do you see how these click together? Another one, trigger could be your partner withdrawing. in their own space, in their own head, whatever, but that you feel that they are withdrawing from you. The wound origin of that is abandonment. The behavior strategy then, how we deal with it, is we might either cling to our partner who's withdrawing, or we might spiral into bad places, or we might panic. The underlying need that's being threatened is reassurance. I trust that's all making sense. So I want to give you a tool real quickly in regards to that bit there. We need to reframe the behavior with curiosity. Remember, I said this is about understanding. It's about giving yourself some answers as to what's the reason this is happening. So instead of why are you attacking me, that might be the feeling, why are you attacking me? You can try instead, what pain is this reaction protecting? It's about changing that language. What pain is this reaction protecting? And it's going to allow you to dig a little bit deeper and be a little bit kinder to yourself as well. So let's have a look at a few tools. Firstly, for the wounded partner. So this is around self-regulation. The first one I want to talk about is from NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It's called a pattern interrupt. What this does, it breaks the neurological loop at the first physiological cue. So when that, trigger first happens, you might get like a tight chest, or perhaps you feel heat rising, or you get racing thoughts. That first physiological cue, that's where you interrupt it. You can do things like change your posture. If you're sitting, stand up, move around, change how your body is. Change the state of your body. Another thing you can do is change your breathing pattern. You only have to do it for a couple of times, and it's a 4-2-6 breathing exercise. And what it focuses on is that when the exhale is dominant, it helps to deactivate the threat response. So 4-2-6 means you breathe in for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 6. Another pattern interrupt is about where your eyes look. And if you haven't done any NLP training, this will sound weird. However, trust me, give it a go, test it for yourself. It's awesome, a great tool. I love it. You move your eyes upward to break the emotional submodalities. Our eyes move to different areas. You might have even heard a little bit about this with like human lie detectors and stuff, with people looking at which direction your eyes move to be able to tell whether you are telling the truth or whether you are fabricating something. That's a bit simplified. It's not really as easy as that. However, you may notice that when you get upset or when you see someone upset, one of the first things we do is we drop our head, we lower our head and lower our eyes. And that actually does connect in the brain to very emotional, charged places. So what you can do as a really quick fix is you actually move your eyes upward and look around. I used to do this with my son when he was a bit younger. If he was getting a bit overwhelmed with emotion, to help bring him into a place of calm so that he could tell me what is wrong, I'd start saying, oh, look at that funny cloud. It looks like a dog. Look at the shape of it. And the minute that we start looking upwards, a different part of our brain is activated and we move out of our emotions and more into logic. So again, try it for yourself when you're feeling really emotional. Do that. Let me know how it goes. I think it's amazing. Anyway, that's a pattern interrupt. You can do something called a somatic drop-in. This is found in psychology, in trauma theory. In a nutshell, what it is when you're in an emotion and you've been triggered, you pause and ask yourself, where do I feel this? What does it need? Where do I feel this? What does it need? And so you're actually sort of moving into your body, into the feeling, rather than getting stuck in your head. You're connecting with your body. But that's a really good way to, again, have compassion for yourself and regulate, control yourself more. You can do something like a reprocessing script. So that's about your internal dialogue, the way you speak to yourself, the way you think. When you are, again, feeling that old programming coming up, that old defensiveness that comes up and you want to react, you start telling yourself, this reaction is old. I'm safe and I can respond from now, not then. And you might need to practice that a few times and really get used to it, because that old programming, that did keep you safe and protected your needs in some instance. So when it worked, of course your mind said, we're going to keep doing that because that worked. Now you're in a different place. So it's important to teach your mind that that initial knee-jerk reaction, that was old you. That was at another time. Thank you for that. However, I'm in a different place now. So I'm going to respond from now, not then. You get into that habit and allow yourself to regain control of the moment. You can also do some trigger mapping exercises. What you can do is list your top 3 triggers, the ones that recur, okay? And with each one, just like I did earlier, identify the wound origin for each of those 3. And then you can design a replacement behavior, a way you'd like to respond instead of what happens currently. Because if you really want to move forward and have emotional regulation and have a really strong relationship, it takes each member of the couple to work on themselves for themselves and then work together for each other. You have to do the internal work on yourself first. It's about getting real with yourself and saying, the way I've been behaving when this happens, it's a cycle. It just ends up making things worse every time. So what can I do differently? What's a replacement behavior? What's an alternative that I can do? And then you practice that alternative. And then, of course, I've got some tools for the receiving partner. For the partner on the receiving end of a wounded lash out, the tools are focused on boundaries and safety. Because again, it's not about excusing the behavior. You don't have to tolerate the behavior. However, the couple will, if they don't learn individually how to communicate and regulate their emotions. So for the receiving partner, I've made one here, but you can come up with one yourself, a boundary statement template. It sounds weird and it might feel weird. However, it can really serve you well because it allows you to put something in place where you have a little bit of distance, you feel a little bit safer, and you feel a little more in control. So the template I wrote up, it says, I understand you're upset. However, I won't stay in a conversation while I'm being attacked. I'm here when we're both regulated enough to talk. That's a lot of words, I understand. However, as I said, you can formulate one of your own. And it's about being very clear and not negating their emotion. I understand you're upset. So that's acknowledging that they feel something. That's really important. However, I won't stay in a conversation while I'm being attacked. So what you're saying is you're sort of drawing your line in the sand to say, look, I know this is tough. However, you're making it personal against me now. You're attacking me. This is not a me problem. This is a you problem. We don't want to say that, though, because that sounds combative. In a nutshell, that's kind of what you're saying, though. I understand you're upset. However, I won't stay in a conversation while I'm being attacked. When we're both regulated enough to talk, I'm right here for you. Really confident, powerful, yet not dismissive. Another tool is you can swap out the assumption for inquiry. So, this is the receiving partner again. You might say something and the person just blows up at you. And you're kind of thinking, wow, where did that come from? That's a bit much. You're overreacting. Whoa. Instead of assuming that it's an overreaction and that, there's no call for it, etc., a really good de-escalation question at that point is to just pause, take a breath, and ask, what did you hear me say? What you're looking for there, what you're wanting to get to the bottom of is, how did they interpret it? Because sometimes what you said sounds one way to you and it's interpreted completely different to the receiver, to the person you said it to. And so where the weight of your statement or your question, where it is in the meaning of the receiver. It's not on what you said. So it can be really good at de-escalating an argument if someone reacts the way that you think, hang on, that's not what I meant. Instead of getting defensive, which is what we do, I didn't mean it like that. Do you see how defensive that is? And it's like pushing away. You can de-escalate by taking a breath and going, oh, hang on, what did you hear me say? And you're asking with genuine curiosity to get to the bottom of it. Then there's tips for co-regulation. Again, without enabling their behavior. This is about keeping your boundary and your safety. One tip is to sit beside your partner, not opposite. When you sit opposite each other, it is more adversarial. It's almost combative. When you sit beside each other and talk, it reduces that. It seems more like I'm on your side as opposed to we're on opposite side. That just makes sense, right? When you think about it. Another thing to do is lower your voice, slower your cadence, because their response or reaction may be to raise their voice, raise the volume, start talking quicker, because they're in an anxiety mode. They're in a fight or flight type of mode. So you put the boundary in and you respect your peace and your space by lowering your voice. Slow down the way you're speaking, which is actually training your nervous system to not mirror the energy of the other person. You control your energy. Voice lower, slower cadence, calmer. The other thing is to validate the emotion without validating the behavior. I understand you're upset. I understand this must be difficult. I can see that this is hitting something a bit deep. Let's pause so that we don't hurt each other. Again, I know the first time you might hear this, you think, oh my God, that's never going to work. We just snap off at each other too much. Of course, because that's our protective mechanism. However, if we really want to change, if we want a better relationship, these are the things that we need to practice. And they do feel weird at first because it's not our natural kind of position. But imagine how many arguments could be de-escalated if one member of the couple is able to calm their breathing down, calm their voice down, and say, okay, I can see this is hitting some really deep stuff. Let's just pause for a minute. Let's pause and go and do something else so that we don't hurt each other. We'll come back to this later. You're validating that this is tough. However, you're also saying, I'm not going to put up, though, with the yelling, the screaming, or whatever, the behavior that's being displayed. So to save your relationship, you're saying, let's pause. It's a really, really strong tool that takes practice, of course. And then to finish it off, there's some couple integration work that you can do, like a debrief, where after a conflict, after the conflict's been resolved, you can both separately, but then you can talk about it together, is you ask questions of yourself like, what did I feel? What did I believe was happening? That's the important word here, believe. What did I believe was happening? What memory or fear did that remind me of? So do you see how it's helping you to look back on that old programming to find out, well, where did this help me once upon a time? It allows you to, see that you're using old mechanisms to deal with life today. What memory or fear did that remind me of? What do I need next time? And then what can I do differently to support safety? So what you're doing as a couple is you're shifting blame into collaboration, because blame is useless. It honestly is. Blame is just emotional blackmail. We want to move it, because if we keep blaming each other in relationships, then that's when all those triggers, all those core kind of wounds come up, like feeling not good enough, feeling abandoned, feeling like your partner's keeping a tally of everything you did wrong versus what they've done wrong. And that whole blame feeling just keeps us stuck in a loop of defensiveness, always being on edge in case something bad happens or we get blamed for something or we do something wrong. What we're looking to do is collaborate, work together. What do you need? What do I need? Those sorts of things. I do have some worksheets. If you're interested in them, please feel free to comment which one you're interested in. I've done a trigger mapping worksheet that helps identify where your reactive behaviors come from, what they're actually protecting, and how to replace them with more conscious kind of responses. I've got boundary scripts. They help stop you absorbing harm while still allowing space for compassion for the person who's struggling. Because that can be so difficult, isn't it? To have compassion for the person who's currently yelling at you or ignoring you or calling you names or whatever. To still have compassion for their struggle can be really difficult if you're being harmed in the process. So boundaries protect you from that harm, which then allows you to still have compassion. The other worksheet I've got is the couples trigger debrief to use after a conflict and turn those wounds, those arguments, into information that's going to help you communicate better in the future. So there's 3 worksheets that I've created, and let me know in the comments if you are interested in 1 or 2 or 3 of those. To close this episode off, It's still about healing. And healing from these things, it isn't about, you need to change how you talk to me, trigger warnings, etc. It's not about that. That's not healing. Healing is I need to understand why my nervous system reacts like this. And you need to respect the boundary I set while I heal. That's the work on both sides of a relationship. The triggered partner heals their wound. The affected partner holds boundaries and stops bleeding for someone else's trauma. That's what this is about. It's compassion and accountability, and it's done together. I trust you've enjoyed this episode and you got something from it. You took something away from it. Oh, I'd love to know what you think. Otherwise, I will see you in the next episode. Have a great day. Bye for now.